Going on? What's going on? Hey, thank y'all for joining the Hype Town Hall. Thank y'all for joining. So, Hype is our student ministry. My name is Brandon Turner, and I'm the Hype student leader. And what we're doing today is, with all that's going on in the world right now, with racism, racial injustice, we wanted to do this for our teens, for our students. And the thing is, we wanted our students to ask the questions for the panel today, because we want to know what they're thinking, what's on their mind, and we can now answer the questions that they have for us. And so I'm gonna let my man on the left introduce himself.
I'm Kenneth Mings. I'm a police officer with the Plano Police Department, 27 years old. Been a cop about 5 years now. Know Brandon through Bible study.
Yeah, I'm gonna let my man on the right introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Trevor Farr, and I connected with this group through Keith Gray and Papa Gray, and I work with Keith. I'm a partner of his, and we became really good friends about 2 years ago.
Good, good. Hey, well, thank y'all for joining us. Really, thank y'all for joining us. So, what we're gonna do is we're gonna have a series of questions that's gonna be asked to us, and some of these questions are coming from our students. So we just want to open up to them and let us know how we're feeling. So I'm gonna let Sesame Morrison, one of our hype leaders, she's gonna ask the questions. So on to her.
Hey, F3C and friends, how are you this evening? We're so glad you guys are deciding to tune in with us tonight. As Brandon said, I'm Sesame Morrison, and we're going to get ready to kick things off. So here's our first question. This is to the entire panel. What are your thoughts on what is going on in the world in regards to racial injustice?
So I'll pop it off first. So my thoughts, what's going on in the world in regards to racial injustice is, honestly, I'm glad to see all the change that is happening right now. You know, to be honest, this is the first time that I've seen the world come together like this in regards to this issue. You know, things in the past have happened, and I've seen people come together, but for some reason, this feels different. This seems different right here. It seems like all of the world is starting to come together and really notice that there is an issue. Something has to change. And so that's kind of what I'm feeling right now on what's going on. So anybody else on the panel want to talk about that?
For me, it's kind of a different angle from Brandon. First and foremost, obviously it breaks my heart any life that's lost through racial injustice or anything of that nature. Big thing for me is how the church responds. I'm a Christian, you know. We as Christians, we're held to a higher standard on how we respond to certain things. I've seen good, but I've also seen division in the church, and that's what concerns me the most, how we as Christians should respond to what's going on. And I've seen good, and I've seen some things that are questionable.
As for me, I've been fortunate to be traveling some different places of the world, Africa, South Asia, where I've been able to see all kinds of discrimination and racism. A lot of times it's within their own culture. Maybe it's a different tribe. In India, they have a caste system, so you have different levels just depending on how you were born, not the color of your skin, because they all have very similar color, but it's the name, your last name causes that division. And so there's people that actually they don't have access to any of the things that you would expect, education, healthcare, just because of their last name and who they are. And so, back to your question, Brandon, because of what's happening here, and it went global, I think it's going to show, hopefully, some the bigger issues, not just the skin color differences, but the divides that happen for all of us on different levels like that, even within the same people groups.
Sure, for sure. I definitely feel that. Definitely feel that. And just to continue on that, just besides the color of our skin and color of African Americans, police brutality too. One thing that really gets to me, and it's like I just don't understand how that force can be taken towards a person because of the color of their skin, and it does break my heart, like you said too. I'm definitely seeing change for sure. Different laws are being passed, and people protesting all throughout the world. I really, really love to see that. So I'm hoping that this brings change. So I'll let Sesame get back to the next question.
Okay. We thank you all for each of your input on our first question for tonight. I couldn't help but take from what you guys were saying about it being larger than just skin color. We know that one of the most recent events that went global was with George Floyd. And basically, we've all been having an issue with police brutality. And Kenneth, since you are an officer and you are an African American, we have a question specifically for you. How should an African American handle a situation where they feel they are being racially profiled by an officer?
That's a good question. I try to see through the lens of Christ. So my response, I would respond as the Bible would say, when we're in any situation where we're dealing with authority, Romans talks about submitting to those in authority. Paul talks about that clearly. He talks about there should be no fear for those who are doing what is right. There's only fear for those who are doing what is wrong. So say an officer does pull you over because you're black, white, or Hispanic. If you're doing what's right, you have nothing to worry about. It's wrong in and of itself, but just do what is right in the sight of the Lord and just go about your business, and I think you'll be good. A lot of these situations that are happening is people are confrontational. They're not submitting to authority. Even if the person's in the wrong, the officer's in the wrong, the best bet is to submit to authority. And then when you're on your way, you can file a complaint or do something later.
Gotcha. Appreciate that answer. So that was specifically just for you. So I guess we can go to our next question, Sesame.
All right. Thank you, Kenneth, so much for that answer. We have some winners that we want to acknowledge before we continue on with our questions. So we are rewarding our Hype students and any other teen who decided to register for this town hall tonight. So our first two winners are Nikia Crawford and Nathan Stafford. All right. So we're going to go ahead and go on to question number 3. And question number 3 is going to be specifically for Trevor. Trevor, with everything that's going on, you know that African Americans have tended to be very vocal, especially since we're in this social media era. I just have a question for you. It says, as a white man, do you feel like black people are overreacting?
Great question. And it's a hard question, really, to answer because I haven't walked in your shoes. I haven't walked in either one of your shoes. So I can't tell you how I would, whether or not it's overreacting. I think as a rule, back to what you said, are people acting Christ-like and how they're responding to this injustice? And some cases I would say, no, they're not. I don't think you can, as Martin Luther King said, I don't think you can fix hate, with more hate. It has to be out of love. And so if we're going to right these wrongs, then that's the only way we're going to solve it. So I don't think it's right to loot and burn cities. And that's what's going on across the country. I believe in protest. I think that's our Constitution allows for that. They want us to do that when we think we see something that's wrong. However, it doesn't say you can go to destroy property and other people's property and lives. So I think that's a big problem. But I do believe that I can't answer specifically because I just haven't been in that situation.
I definitely understand. Thank you for that answer. I guess for me to piggyback off what you said, or kind of respond to what you said, um, I understand what you mentioned about the riots and, the properties, but at the same time, I guess for me personally, just like the that says, um, rioting, the language of the unheard. You know what I mean? And so, though, do I condone it? No. But do I understand it? I do, because it is the language of the unheard. And we've been unheard for so long now. And it's like, well, what do we need to do to get the attention of everybody so we can see change?
I think that's interesting. I think this is where I'm glad we can have a dialogue and talk about this. I think we have to look at facts over feelings. Sometimes that's difficult. And if you, and we're not going to get into the weeds of looking at a bunch of statistics, but I think really you have to look at the statistics. I challenge people that are watching this to go look at statistics and look at and see and let's. I'll be right beside you if we find some injustice and we're all together. And I think with what happened in Minneapolis, we're all united behind that. That was wrong. But I think there's other cases where maybe it's not as clear if it's right or wrong. And so, but I'm with you 100%. But let's be sure, and let's look at the facts. Let's look at all the facts, and let's look at just what's really happening out there first.
Okay.
I'd like to chime in real quick. I think the question was, Trevor, do you think the black community is overreacting? In terms of overreaction, I feel like that has nothing to do with race. I feel like that's a heart issue. Scripture talks about the heart being deceitful. You cannot trust your own heart. And talks about none of us are good. I mean, yes, in a sense, there are some who are doing good protesting, whites and blacks, Hispanic people of all races. But there are some who are overreacting as well. Some who are burning buildings down. It has nothing to do with skin color in that regard. I feel like that's a sin issue, not a color issue.
Okay. That's interesting. I guess, for me, sometimes it's hard to not say it's not a skin issue when there's certain situations where, you see, mass killings where they're taking, the Caucasian man to go get some food, right? Well, while, we're selling, cigarettes, right? It's wrong, right, on the street. But however, what is the difference between a mass killing and selling cigarettes, right? That guy who did the mass killing is still alive, right? But the person who's selling cigarettes, they get, the knee to the neck, saying, "I can't breathe." You know what I'm saying? So I definitely, appreciate your answer for sure. It's just hard for us to see that when that stuff is happening, So that's all. I'll let Sesame go to the next question.
All right. Thank you guys so much. We have another set of winners that we want to announce because we are all about giving away things. So, our next two winners, we have Coy Myers and Peyton Dickens. Woohoo! We need you guys to get ready to claim your prize. Now, as we move forward with the next question, this is going to be to Brandon and Kenneth. Is there a situation you may have experienced that you wouldn't have necessarily experienced if you were white? This experience could have taken place when you were a child or just prior to today.
Good question. So I can recall a situation back in my childhood. So I went to a predominantly white school. I grew up in Allen, Texas, predominantly white neighborhood as well. And I was one of the very few black kids that went to the school. And, one day, there was a new black kid that came to school. And we were out on recess one day, and kids brought the new black kid to come to me, and they said, "Hey, y'all should race." Well, so at that time, I'm thinking, well, man, okay, anybody who wants to come and race, can get beat. You know what I mean? So I didn't think of anything at that time. But looking back to that situation, it's like, well, why did you bring the other black kid to me to race? And it's not that maybe they had bad intentions, but it's the fact that their mindset was thinking that. And it's like, well, how did your mindset start to think, okay, well, let me bring the new black kid to race the other black kid in school? And so now that I think about that, is if I wasn't black, that wouldn't have happened to me. And so those are certain things that we kind of normalize as we're younger, but if we educate the younger kids now about those type of things that happen, or those type of comments, right, maybe they can start to stick up for themselves, stick up for the African American community, so where certain things aren't normalized as much, So pass it on to Kenny.
For me, most of my stuff's from my childhood. I remember specifically walking home, truck driving by, growers chewing tobacco out the spit, chewing tobacco out the window, calls me the N-word. My dad, big fitness guy, ran a lot in my childhood. I used to run with him sometimes. When we go on runs, we'd be running like through creek area where there's woods and brush. I mean, there'd be people walking towards us, going the opposite direction. Specifically, I remember, white women, they'd see us coming, they'd give a bunch of effort, cut through bushes and step over certain things to cross the street in the most inconvenient area, and I was just so confused. And in my head, I'm like, no one's gonna do anything to you, what are you doing? So yeah, there's a couple instances like that growing up.
I say something too?
Yeah, for sure.
Obviously, I haven't experienced shameful, and the history of not just our country but the world with racism, especially with people of color, is just appalling. But actually, not a but. When I was a young father, I had a son that was 3, and I took him to the park, and I was playing with him, and spent about an hour just playing on the playground, and there's other kids there. And so I sat down, wanted to read the paper, thought my son was just going to go play. So I sat down, opened the paper up, and this little black girl, she was probably the same age, 3, came up to me and said, "Mister, will you push me on the swing?" And I said, "Honey, I'm just going to read the paper out." She goes, "It's because I'm black, isn't it?" And I was shocked, but I found myself having to apologize for not doing that to this little 3-year-old, and it shouldn't have been that issue. So I say that because racism is taught, it's learned, it's taught by parents. It's to break this cycle that we're talking about, we have to unteach that stuff. We have to say that we're back to what you were saying about the whole. We have to be more Christ-like. The only way we're going to stop racism, 2 ways: stop talking about it, stop talking about the divide between us, and be more Christ-like. And that's and love each other, and talk, have conversations about it. Sure, do it out of love and respect.
So I guess kind of my next question then, I noticed you said we have to stop talking about racism to help end racism. But my next question is, how do we, if we're going to stop talking about it, how do we make people become aware of it?
I think a tough question. That's not on the list. So I think, well, I'm going to use this as a perfect example. My friend Keith Gray, I'm going to give him a shout out, member of your church, and Corey Dudley over here. We can have honest discussions about race, and neither one of us gets offended. And so we can openly talk about differences in what I found out. I know Keith would say the same thing. We have the same culture. We're different color skin, but we're middle class people that love the Lord, that have families, our families are intact, that we're more similar than different. and and so I mean we're brothers. I mean I love him like a brother, and um, and I think that's how you can talk about racism in the context of your skin color, but it doesn't have to be something that I'm opposed against you because of that. And that's what we have to stop talking about, is we're different because of skin color.
Okay, that's interesting. I guess before we move to our next question, I just want to say one more thing. I know you mentioned that, we have the same culture. I'll probably have to agree to disagree with that, though. And it's cool. I'll agree to disagree. But, I guess you could say, why do people think that black people and white people have the same culture? Because it's truthfully, we really don't have the same culture. Just our culture was kind of stripped from us when we were brought over for slavery. So right now, but it's when we're trying to find our culture and we're trying to actually walk out our culture, that's when there's a problem. You know what I mean?
Can I chime in?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to talk about the culture thing, but you asked if we don't talk about racism, how will we be aware of it? One thing I want to bring up is, for me personally, I don't speak for everybody else. The question I'll ask is, aware of what? Those stories I told you when I was a boy, I can't remember last time I was oppressed or mistreated because I was black. It's been years. So my question is, aware of what? And obviously, there are people who go through things. That's just me personally. That's my response. I see things on TV, they're portrayed on the media in a way that's usually not correct. So the question is, aware of what for me? Then culture, you said walk and live out our culture. Like I said, we're all Christians here, and our culture is Christ, man. We walk out Christ. That's my mindset. We're trying to live it and walk it out. My viewpoint is like, hey, man, we're trying to be like Christ. Yes, we all have different personalities. We all have different passions. We all have different goals. But in a sense, we should be striving to be more like Christ, not our culture from Africa or for black people or Mexico or what any country or origin you're from. It's the scripture.
That's more, I didn't mean in general either. I was just talking about Keith and I. We have very similar upbringings, have very similar, we're culture now, not, from something from origin, culture of origin or whatever you want to say. And so I just want to make that point.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. And
One last thing, this is a quote from one of my favorite pastors, Leonard Ravenhill. I could get this wrong, but he said, I left my nationality and race at the cross.
so that's interesting. That's interesting. I guess, I know you said, you haven't been mistreated in a while, but I guess, I think it's time that we put ourselves in other people's shoes, though, to feel what they're feeling, because just because it's not happening to us personally doesn't mean it's not happening to somebody else. And just because it's happening to somebody else, I know it can happen to me. You know what I mean? So that's what I kind of have to think about. And then in regards to, back to this culture thing, I do want to touch on that. I noticed, just from my opinion, me personally, when I read the Bible, there is culture of different from different people. The Jews had a different culture than the Romans, right? So, and I personally believe God made us that way. There is different culture. Yes, we all are one family in Christ, but to me, it doesn't mean that we can't act out our culture that we were born or raised to have. So, but I feel you. I appreciate the answers. Sesame, we'll ask our next question.
Woo, what a way to get deep. Before we ask our next question, I want to give out some more prizes. I want to list some more winners. So our next two winners are Jace Howe and Darius Cooper. Now, going back to racial injustice and just to touch upon police brutality and just, the differences in what most African Americans feel when they interact with police officers. Kenneth, we have another question for you. So we know that there are trainings in place for officers on how to de-escalate situations. However, do you believe there needs to be some provisions or possibly enhancements to the already established trainings?
That's a good question. Um, we should always be evaluating ourselves and trying to improve. If there are ways for us to improve that prevent life on, excuse me, that preserve life on both ends, citizens, civilians, and police officers, then we should always make reform. But if it's risking on one side or the other, those are tough questions. If we're doing stuff that's going to put police officers at risk, that's a tough question. If we're doing stuff that's going to put civilians at risk, that's a tough question. But I'm always for training to preserve life. Life is precious.
Okay, thank you for that. I also want to extend the question to Trevor and Brandon. Do you guys have any thoughts?
Me personally, I do feel like that there does need to be some more training involved on how to de-escalate a situation. Now, I'm not a police officer, so I don't know the feeling of how y'all feel in certain situations. However, it's just personally from what I see on the videos, it just seems like stuff could be handled a different way than what it has been. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think there's always going to, like you said, there's always going to be room for improvement in everything that we do. And as long as we live in a fallen world, we'll need to be improving. And so that goes for the people being stopped. That also goes for the cops. And they need to always be evaluating and trying to do better. Can they? Absolutely. Do they need to? I don't know. I try not to get stopped.
Yeah, no, I feel you. I mean, and to be honest, because of what we've seen, because of what I've seen in the past and what I've seen happen to other African Americans, when I got pulled over about a month ago, and to be honest, my heart was beating, right? I was nervous because am I going to make it home? You know what I mean? Because of the color of my skin. And it's crazy that I have to feel that way. It's crazy that I have to feel that way in 2020. You know what I mean?
It's when I get pulled over, I get nervous. It's like, what did I do? That was wrong, so I understand being nervous. I don't understand being black and being pulled over, obviously. But I tell my son, my youngest son, exactly what I was taught. When you get pulled over by a police officer, you be respectful. You answer his questions directly, and you keep your hands on the steering wheel. Don't make any sudden moves, because that officer is going to be fearing for his life. So you just need to be respectful, and things will go well.
Sure.
Me personally, before I became a police officer, I've been pulled over on numerous occasions, dealt with the police. Me personally, never once have I ever been in fear for my life from a police officer. Yeah, I've dealt with rude police officers. I've dealt with respectful ones. Never have I once been in fear for my life. I've been nervous, like you said. My heart's been to get a ticket. I don't want a ticket. Can I ask you, Brandon, why were you afraid for your life when you got pulled over?
Well, just because of what I've seen, lately, right? I've seen police officers, shooting, killing unarmed African American men. And so, for me to feel that way, it's because, like I said, just because it hasn't necessarily personally happened to me before, it doesn't mean it can't happen yet, because I know it can happen to me because of what I've seen on the videos, what I've seen on the news. You know what I mean? So that's kind of why I get nervous when I get pulled over by a cop. And honestly, it's not just necessarily by a white cop as well. I would feel the same way from an African American cop, because I do feel like there's also a police brutality issue. Well, just my opinion. So that's just how I feel because of what I've seen.
Like that. Have you looked at, like you said, you brought up a good point, look at statistics, because right now, police officers are at the forefront of the media right now, coronavirus, police brutality. So there's a lot being forced on us, social media, all these things. So what you watch impacts you, The eyes are the gateway, that's what the scripture says. So if you're being forced stuff that that's maybe not happening on, and I say maybe, statistically, it's not happening on a regular basis at all, and it's not even close if you look at statistics. So why should I be afraid of something that is extremely unlikely to happen based off statistics? FBI statistics. I know we were talking about the Washington Post. They post these things. It is extremely rare. So it's like somebody telling me there's a monster under my bed, but I've looked under there 10 times and I've never seen a monster, but people keep telling me that and telling me that and telling me that and telling me that. Now I'm afraid when I've looked 10 times and there's nothing under there.
So, I feel you. I feel you. Thank y'all for that. But we're going to move on to our next question. So, Sister Sesame.
I noticed that Kenneth stated that it's not necessarily per statistics happening as often as we may believe. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I just want to chime in. I guess for me, if I see one video of a man being held down by someone's knee, and then I see another video where someone is being reprimanded by officers behind just being in the front of a convenience store, and they're manhandling him, and to a point where like he loses his life. Like, I guess because I know our viewers are kind of, having a bit of a time trying to understand, why would we consider, like, if I see it, even if it happened one time, shouldn't you just be afraid of that? Like, we have to confront these situations and we have to acknowledge them. They shouldn't have to happen 100 times per statistics for us to be concerned. Does that make sense?
It does.
I understand what you're saying. I'm just like, what's the question for me?
Well, not necessarily a question, but I guess I kind of want you to think about, when we bring up statistics, I think that's where we start to feel silence as a community, the African American community, because it's always like, well, statistically, it's not happening that often. But the fact that I saw it one time, that's a problem.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and obviously, I mean, the scripture talks about rejoicing with those who are rejoicing and mourn with those who are mourning. If somebody's hurting about something or scared of something, I'm not going to go say, hey, you're wrong, man up, look at the statistics. Obviously, you talk to them, have a conversation, have dialogue, show compassion as Christ would, and talk about the situation. And even though it is happening at a low rate statistically, it's still happening, and that's still not okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely want to add, I guess, since we're talking statistics, right? I guess statistically, though, the probability, though, of an African American getting pulled over by a police officer and that ending up in death, it seems to be that there's a higher probability, right? I know there's a statistics out there that says, that white people are killed. I know people like to throw this around that white people are killed more by cops than black people. But we got to remember that if you look at proportionally, though, there's more white people in America. You know what I mean? And so proportionally, the numbers show that black people at a rate get killed more by police officers than Caucasian. And that's just my take on it. But I don't want to get too deep into that. But we'll go on to the next question. So, Sister Sesame.
Okay. So this is also to Kenneth as well. We have a student who wanted to ask, why don't officers, like the ones that are considered good officers, quit the force when they know that there's corruption? And so we want to ensure that our students understand that we still need our good cops in the vicinity. So if you could kind of touch on that and maybe explain why you take being an officer so serious. Maybe explain to us what made you become an officer, and even with everything that's going on, why do you remain an officer?
First off, I just want to thank the student. It's good to have young people asking questions. We have our parents in the world, in the media, but we need to ask questions for ourselves and figure them out ourselves. So I appreciate the question. Honestly, I played football in college. I like to be active. I decided to be a cop because I wanted to be on my feet and I wanted to help people. So I thought being a cop would be fun. In terms of what's going on, the people I work with are good people. I don't deal with racism at my workplace. I don't personally. I'm not saying it doesn't exist or it doesn't go on. I have good coworkers. Let me say it that way. There are a few bad apples. So when people say that, why are you still being a police officer when there's so much corruption in the department or in police organization as a whole? I personally don't believe that there's that much going on. And if there was, I want to be a light for Christ, in everything I'm doing. I want to stand up for what's right. So if that was true to the extent that the media portrays it, I would stay because I want to do what's right. I want to be an example for Christ. I want there to be change.
Also, that's stereotyping. It's saying, if you have one bad officer, well, and make a broad brush and say, well, they're all bad. And that's not true. That's like saying, well, maybe there's one black guy that's a thief. You're saying they're all bad. And we just can't do that. And I think that's where we're getting lost in all of this. Very few people.
I agree with him.
Well, go to our next question.
Okay. And Kenneth, I definitely want to thank you for your response because, again, like I said, we want to make sure that we help our students understand that you don't need to leave in order to make change. We need you there. We need good officers. That's why, it's great that you're still an officer. This here is to the panel in its entirety. As we can see, there's just racial tension. There's just a lot of misunderstanding going on, and unfortunately, there is hatred. So our question to each of you would be, how do you handle hatred in this world today?
Anybody want to go first on that one? So I guess for me, how do we handle hatred, right? How do we handle hatred? I guess I was always taught love heals all. Kill them with kindness, right? Love heals all, kill them with kindness. But the question is, how do we confront it, right? And it just seems like we have been killing with kindness at times, and we do confront with love, but still sometimes we don't see change. And I'm not saying that means, let's not show love anymore. It's just, what do we do? What's the next solution, right? And to be honest, at times, as a Christian, just keeping it real, it is hard to show love to somebody who dislikes you because of your skin color and nothing that you actually did to them. And if you think about that, naturally, we're not supposed to love that person who treats us that way, naturally. But God calls us to love. God calls us to love. And to be honest, the only way we can love that way is to have Christ. Because our natural being is not to love somebody who does us wrong. Loving somebody who does you wrong is not about feelings. It's about loving that person because that's what God says to do. You know what I mean? So the way I would handle the hatred is just to keep killing them with kindness, pray for them. Also, action. I love the protesting. I see what it does. And so, I loved, for example, we had a Collin County event where it was a prayer. A lot of people came out, right? All different races. And I really enjoyed that. And to me, that was the first time I've ever seen so much diversity in one area, all for one cause. You know what I mean? And I heard the Caucasian pastor up there speaking, saying that, hey, it's time for the white church to get involved. And he also apologized. He also apologized that he was doing the African American community well, that white churches have been doing the African American community a disservice because in the past they have not been sticking up for us the way that we feel like it should go, you know? And so to me, that spoke volumes. And for him to say that and admit that, and for him to say it's time for change, that's how I really know that, man, something is changing right now. Something is changing, you know what I mean? And to defeat hatred, right, you always got to go with love. But it's got to be love from all angles. Both sides, right? All races. So, just my 2 cents.
To have hate change, you have to have heart change. Sure. And the only way to truly do that is with Christ. And what does Christ say about this? Love your neighbor as yourself. Who's your neighbor? He was talking about the Samaritan, a person that was on the road to Jericho that was hurt, and the Levite walked by and didn't help, and who helped them? It was a Samaritan person. So I think that's who we define as your neighbor. It's anyone. And so I think we have to show that Christ love to others. And you're right, it's not natural. And we have to be willing to go across the street to do it, not just, on our own.
Agree. You got something to say, Kenny?
They both hit on the nail. It's Christ and a heart change, and like you said, action as well. I mean, we can't just, even as Christians, our purpose is to spread the gospel. We can't just sit in our house, pray, and go to church. We have to go out there, share the gospel. And that's an action part of it. With racial things going on, some people believe there's injustice, and they want to go out there and peacefully protest, and that's on their heart. They should do that. That's a good thing to stand up for what's right. So, you guys hit on the nail.
I agree. Sesame, back to you.
Okay. We thank you guys so much, again, just for your input. We have one last question for the night from another student. The question is, do you think racism will ever end?
A good question. Me personally, I do not think racism will ever end. Unfortunately, I think racism will always be around. Now, if you ask me, can we get closer to equality? My answer may change. I may say yes, we can definitely get closer to equality, but to me, equality and racism are 2 different things, right? Equality kind of equates for me as like, justice, things like that, but racism is different than me because that's a heart thing. It's a mind thing. You can have equality in the world, but there's going to be some people who don't have a change of heart. Because the thing is, it's hard for racism to end when generations after generations have been taught to, kind of like what you said, right? Hate is taught. The generations have been taught to hate African Americans because of the skin color, right? And why is that? You know what I mean? And so to me, that's why racism will never end, because it is very hard to unlearn those ways. Now, Christ can come inside your heart, right? Christ can come inside your heart, and you can unlearn those ways. But unfortunately, not everyone is also going to be saved, too, as well. So because not everyone's going to be saved, that means that there's still going to be sin. There's going to be hearts that aren't changed, And so as long as people keep getting taught generation after generation after generation, I don't think, I just don't think it's going to end, I just don't think it's going to end. But, Kenny, what do you think?
Racism, it's a sin. Sin's not going away. Even we as Christians, we're redeemed by Christ, but we still have these fleshly bodies, and we're prone to sin. There's this natural thing in us that causes us to sin still. That's why Christ had to die for us, so it's not going away.
I would totally agree with you guys, and it's hard to love people that don't look or act like you, and so being forced to do it is just not going to work. So I think because of what we do have is sin, and we have a fallen world, it won't ever go away. Hopefully we can, as believers, we can diminish it. And we can only do what's in front of us. And ourselves, right? We can only work on ourselves. And so I think that's really the question. What am I doing about racism in my own heart, in my own life, in my own family? Am I teaching them, not my kids, not to be racist? Are my friends racist? Am I going to stop somebody at work from saying a racial joke? And that's all or a sexist joke or whatever it is. And sometimes I don't do a good enough job of that, I'll admit. And so I think it's really, we have to look at ourselves. Each one of us has to take that on, especially as believers. We're called to do that.
Well, I appreciate that, y'all. Like Sesame said, that was the last question for us. So I just want to thank all the Hype students.
Can I ask one more question off script?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I just got one question off script. For us fellas, since we're up here, a question I get, predominantly white people is, why are we so uproar about this issue when there's so many other issues in all cultures, but specific ones in the black community? I guess I'm asking you, Brandon, and then I can answer after you. But yeah, I know the big topic that comes up, black on black crime or gang violence or this or that. Why are we so uproar about this one when we're not rioting or protesting or doing these certain things for other issues? That's my question.
Well, to be honest, that black on black crime, that whole phrase, I don't believe in black on black crime, to be honest. I believe in crime. Whether you're black, white, Indian, crime is crime. So this black on black crime, to me, doesn't really exist. You know what I mean? Yes, black people commit crimes against other black people, but Caucasians commit crimes against other Caucasian people. We don't call it white on white crime. You know what I mean? So we just call it crime. And I guess the reason why we could say we're in an uproar, why I'm upset, I guess, is because it's been happening for so long and nothing has changed, right? So the thing is, you have an African American committing a crime versus a Caucasian committing a crime. Who do you think's getting the longer prison sentence, right? We've seen that the African American, at least from my personal experience, right, they're going to get the longer prison sentence. And why is that? And it's not that we don't believe that people should get in trouble for what they do if they do something bad. It's the justice, right? There's not fair justice going on. And that's what we want to see. We want to see equality in all parts of the world. We want to see fair justice.
Like, for example, here's one. Say, these are close numbers, but I can't say for sure. I remember looking at the site. Let's say there's 15 unarmed black men killed, and I read a statistic, there's 1,000 black children aborted a day. We're Christians, I know that's personal for people, but we as Christians, believe that's wrong. But the churches, I don't see churches, a lot of churches protesting that. I don't see a lot of the black community protesting it. I'm talking 1,000, babies made in the image of Christ, and I don't see people protesting that. And I see the church now jumping onto this. And I'm like, all right, church, are we doing this because we care from the heart, or are we doing this because it's socially cool right now? It's culturally accepted right now. We got all the celebrities, we got all the TV stars putting black squares up and this and that. So where are black squares for innocent children who are being murdered? Where are black squares for? So that's one question I want to ask. Cause I get a lot of white people asking that, and they're afraid to talk to an African American about that because it might be deemed a racist or this or that. So I'm asking, and I literally had that question asked to me at least 8 white people. So your thoughts on that?
I feel you. But for the sake of time, I thank you for that question, though. But for the sake of time, we're gonna wrap it up, though. So I definitely want to thank everybody for joining in. I want to thank all my Hype students for registering, all my Hype students for watching. We definitely appreciate y'all, and we hope everyone has a great night. Thank y'all.